Hello everyone, welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyita Basu. I'm back on YouTube after a long time, and today I have a special guest for my show. He is Cliff Smith, Washington Project Director for Middle East Forum. He is specializing on Islamism and especially on the subcontinent. He has been talking about Bangladesh, and this is Cliff's second visit to India this year. So Cliff, welcome to my show.
Thank you.
And how are you? How has your Indian experience been?
It's been a lot of fun. Last time I came here and I visited Udaipur and Delhi and Srinagar, and I really enjoyed my trip. I'm very lucky to have been able to come back in a relative short amount of time. And again, this time I've been almost exclusively in Delhi, just talking to different think tanks and people in the government about the issues that of mutual concern to America and India and my organization and theirs. And it's been a great experience getting to know more Indian policymakers and thinkers and to discuss areas of mutual concern.
You have been talking about and you've been following the Bangladesh situation pretty closely, especially the radicalization that is taking place. What is your view of what is going on in Bangladesh, the US response to Bangladesh, and how it can actually impact India's security?
Well, you know, Bangladesh is a relatively young democracy that's struggling to find its footing, and it's always difficult to find your way through potential trip-ups to that. And I think, unfortunately, the views of my government in recent years have been focused on perhaps some of the wrong threats. The Hasina government has made mistakes and is not perfect, but at the end of the day, it is a government that I think has provided stability and has provided for some amount of human rights and a secular government, while some of the opposition, not all of it, but some of it, by especially Jamaat-e-Islami, which has long been basically opponent of even the existence of Bangladesh. They were involved in the 1971 genocide during Bangladesh's War of Independence. The concerns about their interests and their goals have not been taken into proper consideration. The Biden administration, for example, has restricted visas for people that they deem as not supporting the democratic process. What this functionally means is sanctioning people for not allowing the Jamaat-e-Islami organization to contest elections. Now, there is a long time universal understanding among political scientists and thinkers about government that there is a bright line between parties that peacefully participate in the democratic process and ones that don't. In the case of Jamaat-e-Islami, they were part of the Bengali genocide in 1971, like I mentioned. In the 2014 election, Islami Chhatra Shibir, their student wing, was, according to many analysts, one of the most violent non-state actors on the planet. They burned Hindu villages, they attacked Christians, they attacked Buddhists, they attacked Muslims that didn't agree with their interpretation of Islam, in order to try to keep and maintain power, or gain and maintain power. This is not a party that ought to be allowed to participate in elections, certainly not without acknowledging this past and not without moderating. Unfortunately, Jamaat-e-Islami, is a transnational organization. As you know, they have branches in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, even in Europe and the United States. And the narrative you're getting from their wings in the United States is essentially that, oh, look, we're this poor beleaguered minority, we're being attacked by the Hasina government, how unfair this is. I have never forgotten, in the last election, there was an NGO speaker at this NGO event that criticized the Bangladeshi government for not allowing the Jamaat party, as he put it, to participate in the election. Zero mention was made of this history, and I do not think you can separate that history from what was going on. And I think now that kind of thinking that wants to think that with zero contrition, with zero acknowledgement of the past, that this party is now rehabilitated not to be able to participate just like any other party. This is a violent party that has been violent within the past decade in order to gain power. And the mere fact that there have been some problems with the Husseini government shouldn't mean that Jamaat-e-Islami just becomes rehabilitated and is a fair democratic partner. They're not. They're explicitly not. They have been dedicated to enforcing their narrow version of Islamic law on other Muslims and non-Muslims alike for as long as they have existed. And until that changes, those considerations need to be taken into account. And I fear that those are not being taken into consideration by enough people in the U.S.
So, prior to this program, you were talking about the U.S. as a problem understanding, lack of understanding of what Islamism is about. Sure. You think it is stemming from there?
I think that's part of it. I don't think it's Jamaat-e-Islami, and their franchises in the U.S. Alone. I think there is different organizations that are linked to the Muslim Brotherhood or various Deobandi organizations and different other strains, Turkish Islamism, that are the most theocratic, the most overtly political, wings of Islam and radical Islamism that in many times are funded or at minimum supported in different ways by foreign actors, by the Turks, by the Qataris, by the Pakistanis, that are trying to push a narrative that any criticism of the most radical versions of Islam or the most radical actors in Islam is really a criticism of Muslims or Islam in the wider sense. I don't think that's true. They throw around the term Islamophobia a lot, and not only do these groups, but so does now Turkey and Pakistan. What's even funnier to me is that recently China has started throwing around the Islamophobia accusation at the U.S. By any rational definition. Given what is happening to the Uyghurs, China should be considered the most Islamophobic country on the planet. Yet they are also making this charge against the U.S. and other countries, which shows you this isn't about substance. This isn't really about persecuting Muslims. It's about a political agenda and using the fear of bigotry against your opponents. And I think there's a lack of understanding both about the difference between the vast majority of moderate Muslims and the most political actors in the U.S. And I think that these are the factors that help enforce this misconception in the U.S.
So if there's a misconception, since we are talking, we are in India, we are Indians, we are very, very sometimes upset about the kind of narrative that comes out from the US, especially when we see organizations like the USCIRF and others, and they are being fed this propaganda against India, and India is being painted in the vilest of colors. Now, what happens is that if there is a lack of understanding, if there is, because they are too scared to be, perhaps they are too worried that they are going to be called Islamophobe, if that comes to determine policy, it affects relations with countries internationally. Isn't that a problem?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons that I am interested in this work is because I have believed for decades, frankly, that a close U.S.-India relationship is important for both of our interests. I mean, I just look at history and I look at geopolitics. Both America and India are former British colonies. We're both pluralistic. We're both democracies. We're both concerned about radical Islam. We're both concerned about a rising China. I could go on and on. Sure, we have differences. We have different histories, all that kind of stuff. But we also have a lot of similarities, and I think in the long run, our interests lie together, and I think that removing speed bumps to those interests is important. And there's plenty of room for criticism between friends and between allies to better our policies. But at the end of the day, I think our interests and our values largely align, and I think it's important to keep that going.
Yeah. So when you were talking about Islamism in the U.S., there is this news that Ilhan Omar's trip to Pakistan was funded by the Pakistani government. It has been now it's public now, that information. How do you think this thing is going to be treated and seen in the US?
Unfortunately, I don't think it will get seen much at all, or at least it won't be understood much. I think that's the problem, is that, Ilhan Omar, while she is Muslim, she's Somali origin. She isn't even on like the relevant subcommittees on South Asia policy, but she has thrown herself headlong into these disputes and has accused all her opponents of being Islamophobes or whatever the case may be. And the fact that it's quite clear, she flies to Azad Kashmir, the Pakistani side of Kashmir, and, decries India, that creates problems for the U.S.-India relationship. And the fact that she was funded by the Pakistani government to fly there, to go there shouldn't surprise anyone. I mean, if you'd seen the stances she'd taken, the friends that she'd made, she has been very close with the Islamic Circle of North America, which is headed by a Pakistani American doctor that used to be the leader of the Jamaat student wing in Pakistan. So, it's not like it was hard to figure out. We just now recently, I believe today, had it confirmed that it is indeed true that the Pakistani government funded the trip. And, that's fine. Learn Pakistan's perspective, but, everybody should realize where she's coming from and what side she's on. They shouldn't take it as anything even remotely objective or even remotely fair. She certainly hasn't tried to, see both sides. She hasn't taken trips to India, to the best of my knowledge. She's done everything. She's taken one side and one side only, and doesn't care to discuss the issue beyond that. And I think that's a problem.
How much influence can she possibly have on policy?
Oh, it's not that she has a huge amount of influence. I mean, she's one of 435, and she represents sort of the hard left of the Democratic Party. But it does, she does take a certain part of the Congress with her, sort of the more hard left, to the degree they are going to polarize these kinds of issues and, make all these, hard black and white distinctions when there could be collaboration, and rather, to just demonize rather than collaborate. It makes it harder. It makes it more difficult. It makes suspicions, because, many Americans, sadly, to them, they don't know much about Bangladesh, they don't know much about India, so if somebody tells them a story, sometimes even if it's true, there are bad things that happen everywhere, they don't understand the wider issue or the wider context. And so when they hear a bad story, oh, this bad thing happened here or there, okay, what's the wider context? That gets missed. And I think it's important that people that have sort of a wider view take up that and discuss that, rather than just let someone like her drive the entire narrative.
So is this particular, I guess since the American public is not, I'm not talking about the American public, among say policy influencers in think tanks and all, what sort of an image does India have in those areas, in these particular think tanks?
There's a lot of think tanks with a lot of different views. I would say that in general, I think that there is a understanding among both Republicans and Democrats, various think tanks around town, that sort of what I said, that the U.S. and Indian interests in being a counterweight to a rising China, being concerned about radical Islam, is in our long term both, these issues are in common, and we ought to collaborate on economic matters, on security matters, on geopolitical matters. And I don't think she represents the mainstream. I do think that her kind of extreme, frankly not truthful version of events makes it harder to make these things happen, because it does create a constituency that doesn't see the bigger picture and only sees it in a very narrow, distorted lens.
Okay. So there is hope that these people will not be able to influence policy that much, if at all.
I don't think they will change its direction ultimately. I do think they make it more difficult and more, will slow the process down at a time where we need to be working together more closely as countries, because our interests concerning China, concerning, radical Islam, largely intersect. And I think that that over time will win the day.
Thank you. Thank you, Cliff, for appearing on this show. Do come back to India again.
I hope so.
Thank you.